I rode in the rain because that's what he loved, the rhythmic slap of rubber through wet leaves, the small, high, cool clink of chain against cassette, the way the forest smelled after the sky opened up. When Jacob told me he was leaving, he said it between two mouthfuls of coffee and smiles, a careless, deflecting smile like he always had. "I'll be back in a few days." He said it like the forest was a relative's porch you could walk away from and return to in time for dinner. He said it like the trailer behind his bike was a little cottage, packed with warmth and light and the sorts of things you need to sleep under trees, a tiny stove, a folded rain tarp, a sleeping bag thick enough to keep winter out, a bow he'd take along because he liked the shape of the world in winter and the disciplined smallness of hunting. He was 22 and stubborn and quiet, the way young men are when they take the woods seriously but are not yet full of their doubts. I could picture him leaving, the feel of his rubber gloves, the way he cinched the trailer hitch like he was fastening a conscience to his back, the small, almost ceremonial way he kissed the sticker on the frame, a sticker that said "So do" or HOH or something that the rest of us bought for him because we liked tokens, and then he pedaled away into the wet green grammar of the rainforest. He'd sailed that coastline in his head for years, a map of streams and footbridges, and the way the moss lays itself over roots like a secret. The Ho meant romantic ruin, poetic absence, a place where people go and come back different or they don't come back at all. He believed himself the sort of person who could manage both the beauty and the hunger there. His bike and trailer were found the next day. People say it with dull mouths. Found. He wasn't. They found the rig off Solduck Road, abandoned, its kickstand still a little clean where the mud hadn't yet filled in. The trailer sat like a small, sad island, the canvas still taut with the rain he'd expected. The coat he favored, a blue thing, stiffened in the cold. There were arrows embedded in the trailer's canvas, the way small truths embed where people also keep their lies, notches of dried mud that looked like someone had tried to root him out of the world with a pointed stick. Someone saw a bow on the ground, a dark shape half swallowed in leaf matter. Someone else said they saw a single boot print leading into the trees, then nothing. The phone lines filled with voices that had the same brittle, urgent sound. My brother's bike, his trailer, he's missing. Can you come? Can you look? Can you look? There are people who make the forest their home. Jacob was the sort of person who thought the forest an open, honest friend. The forest took that friendship and twisted it. We searched for him like a small town chasing down a rumor. We walked the washes and called his name until our voices wore holes in the air. Searchers with dogs came, and they were serious men in waterproof jackets, the kind whose faces are carved by weather. We spread out in small panels, orange vests blinking like desperate wildflowers, weak-honed ridgelines, and the flat, soggy bottoms that make the ho, levels of green set against older greens until the horizon disappears in the way that makes your eyes play tricks on you. We followed boot prints and broken branch tips, weird the ravines where the river took on the color of steel. It is one thing to read about a search, and another to walk one. There's a particular sound that comes from the wet feet of 20 people moving in bad light, a kind of low rustling that the rainforest swallows and holds. And then time happens in a different measurement when someone is missing. Days drag like chains. The search log becomes a document with careful, professional lines. We wrote down his name and set it beside coordinates and timestamps like the things would count for anything. We checked the bend of every river as if it might remember. We put up posters that read, "Missing, Jacob Gray, Miss, young man, traveling by bicycle, please call." The letters were harsh on the paper, black on white. We printed an image of his face that looked like some version of a figure trapped on a screen. His mother called, and I could hear the paperiness of her voice, as though some small part of her was already thinking in terms of what we do when we lose someone, the lists of deeds, the dates, the insurance. Months eroded into a slow, unseasonal winter. People who had been skeptical of the forest's appetite became believers. The trail had swallowed him. Hikers who knew the loops, the low-lying areas where the water mink around the base of old trees would say, in the half-joking tone of people who live where storms turn everything private, "The Ho keeps secrets." That phrase is easy to say until you realize every secret is someone's life. A year later, the forest returned part of him. Park crews, not the romantic, uncoordinated wanderers you imagine, but a certain small cohort of people trained to know the mood of old growth, found clothing and small personal effects in a quiet backcountry hollow, a place where the map is only a suggestion. They found a rib of a tent, some snapped carbon poles, a strap of his trailer still caught on a root. They found bones, and when they did, they stopped like people who had crossed the threshold between curiosity and law. The bones were confirmed as his, and the death was described in procedural terms: exposure, hypothermia, the slow give of human bodies to cold. That is what the paperwork says. But the paperwork cannot list the other things: the way the trailer's canvas once bore arrows, the silence of his bike flags, the small domestic accoutrements that seemed placed to say, "I will be back." There are facts we have, and there are images that will not be erased: the trailer, the blue jacket, the mud like a bruise along the spokes. There is also the way the family folded in on itself, a kind of inward weathering. I watched a photograph of his sister sitting alone on a porch with a paper cup of coffee, wet ringed over the wood, and I thought about the ways grief becomes weather too, a slow erosion of the edges. There are also always in these things the small mockeries of justice, paths where someone might have gone, tracks that might have been his, but later determined not to be, a dozen thin hopes that were not enough. Afterward, when the immediate search ended and the press smell of it dissipated, people tried to tell themselves narratives. River Steel People is one. Predators are another. Some in the forums, the strangers with long usernames, offered the possibility of foul play, and that thought became an ugly ghost that slid through the neighborhood. What if someone had wanted that trailer because it held gear that could be sold? What if someone had seen an easy man and taken advantage? My brother said nothing when I asked him if he thought that his silence was a geography of its own. The police were polite about it and factual. The woods made their quiet counterargument by not telling, by not making an admission. You cannot tell a forest what to reveal. An alpine meadow might be honest and speak in flowers, but the rainforest is master of misdirection, of decaying layers that both protect and obscure. The trees drop their needles like curtains. The fallen trunks become catacombs for small things. Animals we never see move in the dark and push the earth in ways we will never track. Moss retakes a boot mark in a single season. We tried to imagine Jacob's last day. Imagination is a cruel, necessary thing in those circumstances. We pictured the wind coming through the cedar, a step on a slick rock, a hip turn that threw a bicycle trailer off the intended line, a slip into a current that moved much faster than he expected. We pictured, as a separate child of that imagination, the idea that he simply sat down and lay down and stopped, that he let the cold come and the world, which is indifferent, took him. Either narrative felt obscene and small. There were those in our circle who said a person who knows the woods would not make those mistakes. But the woods are full of lessons about how knowing still leaves you vulnerable. Knowledge is not armor. In the months after they found his remains, and please understand how the word remains feels, as if someone has settled into the part of your life you never cleaned. There were whispers of things we could not prove. There was the image of arrows in the trailer canvas, and the tiny cut marks around the zipper where hands had been, and hands had been patient, and the way the mud along the spokes made little ribs. Some said they had seen a man the week before, a stranger on the Soul Duck Road, whose jacket didn't fit like it belonged to the world, and whose van was full of oddities. Others said there was nothing, just rain. The official autopsy said exposure, and it seemed unfair to invent more violent climaxes to what might have been a long, terrible slow giving. We held a small ceremony. It was private and thick with rain. Someone lit a paper lantern and set it by the river where they'd found tracks that were not his, where the road takes a suspicious turn. A friend read a poem, his voice shook. But we are not small towns that burn matters into memory in ways older people do. We broke apart like wet bread. People who love someone in this modern world try to make sense with small acts. They make a fund, they set up a scholarship, they photograph the things he loved. Someone placed an old coffee mug on a rock near the trailhead with his name written on it in permanent marker. Children on the trail would point at it later and ask why, and their parents, who everyone used to be, would say it is to remember. I had a series of recurring dreams after he disappeared. It's strange to admit now, as someone who likes the shape of facts, that dreams held a model closer to the truth than our rational conversations did. In one dream, he was pedaling at an impossible speed, the trailer behind him blown up like a sail, and the forest was a corridor of people carrying their hands like shields. In another, he was very small and sleeping in a hammock while above him, moss dropped like snow. Each dream ended with the river ticking something like a tide. Dreams are not evidence. They are, in the way that grief makes us odd, an entire other ledger. I remember the rain on the day they found him. It was not the kind of rain that comes to cleanse. It was the kind that weights the air. The park men, soft-voiced, sovereign in their practicalities, came back with a zipped bag, and I watched as they moved through protocols like technicians. It felt, unwisely and cruelly, like a statement being made by a bureaucracy about the unknowable. They said the remains were consistent with an extended period of exposure. The coroner's words arrived like a statement on a press release. He had died. That is a sentence that takes over a human life and reduces it to a corner office remark. Years have blurred it. You think you will be able to say the details the same way forever. The exact mud color, the route, the smell of his jacket. But memory slurs the edges and gives you myths. I have to rely now on what small pieces of record remain: the police report that said missing person, the press clipping of the abandoned trailer with its arrows, the call logs, and the NPS statement confirming human remains. I have those things like scraps you sew into a pillow to hold grief like a small lump. Statistics insist this is not unusual. People get lost. But statistics feel like a stranger's hand. They will give you a context, but never the glaze of a face. After all the officialness, some things about the hoe remain unchanged. The moss keeps growing. The river keeps finding the sea. People still cycle away into the green in the same determined way. Sometimes I ride out there now and feel my hands on the bars as if I were holding onto a rope. Sometimes the urge to quit is a small creature at my shoulder. I go to the trailer where it was abandoned, and there is only a memorial note left by someone named Claire. Ride safe. We love you. I touch the paper and the ink is bled a little from the rain. Some days it is enough, and other days it feels like a single inadequate anchor in a world that moves them be so swiftly. There are things I will never know. Was he taken? Did he slip on a moss-covered rock? Did the night arrive and his careful measures fail? We had no way of answering that with finality because the forest keeps part of itself sealed. But we do have a list of small truths that do not change. He was loved, he planned, he went into the hoe, and did not return to our table. That is, painfully and stubbornly, enough for certain kinds of grief. I sometimes think the worst thing is not that a body was found. The worst thing is the way uncertainty reshapes a life into a loop. You cannot leave the house without thinking of the small things he might have packed that would have been useful. The extra mitten, the spare battery for the GPS he never bought, the extra granola bar he would have laughed about packing. It is absurd to think of such minute items in the scale of death, but grief wants to rearrange the world into items, as if an inventory will hold the pandemic of feeling. The trailer sits now on the porch of his mother's house, tarp carefully removed, frame cleaned, a small museum of what was once practical. Only once did I see his bike move, and it was in a dream that smelled like diesel and wet wood. The wheels spun slowly like the hands of a clock going the wrong way. The trailer behind it held a small lantern that had been lit years earlier. I woke shaking, and in the real world the trees outside my window were entirely calm, and that calm felt like a lie. People will tell you that the forest is impartial. That's true. The forest does not hate, but it is not kind either. It keeps its things and its laws. We have climate and seasons. The elements take what they are given. Sometimes those things are human. The hoe is patient. It knows the habit of an animal and the fragile arrogance of people who think they can go and come back at their leisure. It rewards curiosity with beauty, and sometimes it answers that curiosity with the kind of absence that hollows out families. When the press finally had less interest, the threads of us that had run the search found other things to do, jobs, errands, funerals that were not his, but the trail had been made forever part of our biography. Someone would arrive in our town and ask casually if anyone remembered Jacob Gray, and the answer would always be, "Yes, we remember." And then the person who asked would ask the same question as everyone asked, "What do you think happened?" We could offer the official lines and the private memories. We still could not answer the question that sits like a stone in the center of the body. Where did he go, and why did the world ask so little in return? I do not like to end this on a flourish because there is nothing poetic about our grieving bodies. The Ho did not deliver us a plotline with closure. It returned part of him in a way that allowed the law to file a form and the world to say, with legal finality, that this was a death. That is not consolation. For consolation, you must invent a different story. For me, the story is this. He loved the wild, and he went into it in the way only the young can, believing themselves exempt from the cosmos's ordinary cruelty. He was not exempt. The forest kept its secret as it has kept many others. We love him still, and the rain still knows his name. On the morning John Devine failed to return, the mountains received him like they receive everything that arrives unannounced, without comment, without haste. The ridgelines around Mount Baldy were the same dark green they always were. Massive trunks shrouded in moss, buttressed roots knotted into the ground like the hands of old men. Rain had been a patient presence for days, softening the topsoil into a kind of secretive mud, making the forest less a collection of trees than a single breathing organism. He went into that organism in the early light with the same casual confidence that had followed him through other small miseries of life, stubbornness married to habit. He intended only a walk, maybe a day's wander. He told no one he was afraid, because fear was the opposite of the pride he wore against the world. When he did not come back, the forest kept the answer as it keeps its best things, hidden beneath layers. The first hours of a missing person story are full of ordinary hope. Maybe the path took him longer, maybe the tide or a wrong turn, maybe a nap in a windproof pocket of trees. They called his name into the moss and got nothing but the long, patient echo of the park. They drove the logging roads and checked the pullouts and scoured the obvious places where someone could get lost. The sky turned the color of wet pewter, and the forest chewed at each hour, making it harder to find a soft edge to the problem. The National Park Service did what it always does. It marshaled people and machines in a particular sort of disciplined urgency. Rangers are accustomed to weather and wilderness. Their voices over the radio are factual and without melodrama. They set up a perimeter. They dispatched teams to comb ridgelines and valleys, trained dogs to trace scent in a world of damp, confused smells, and called for aircraft to bring a perspective the trees refused to grant. The helicopter that answered the call that season was one of the workhorses of mountain rescue, robust, loud, the kind of rotorcraft that takes weather as part of its job. It carried rescuers and equipment into places human feet would take hours to reach. It carried the hope, ineffable and fragile, that if the forest had hid him from sight, it might not have hidden him from the sky. On the 12th day of the search, in conditions that had already frayed nerves and bodies, the rescue operation took a turn no one had planned for. The helicopter that had been a gaze from above metal wings beating against the rain suffered a catastrophic failure. The aircraft crashed in the slope country it was trying to serve. 3 people who had gone aloft to find a man in the dark green of trees did not return. The official logs would later record the facts with bureaucratic precision: the time, the model, the weather conditions, the injuries sustained. They would list the names, the identifications, the procedural follow-ups, and the quiet, relentless legalities of accident review. Those were the words of a system built to process tragedy. They were not the words of the people who watched a friend not come back. The crash did something that is hard to measure with paperwork. It inverted the moral economy of rescue. The search for John Devine, an effort meant to reclaim one life from the indifferent vastness, had been transmuted into something else, an operation where others paid the price that curiosity and duty demanded. When a rescue kills its rescuers, the forest has done more than conceal, it has altered the map of grief. The families of the dead, who had perhaps expected to wait for a different kind of phone call, were handed instead the brutal syntax of a coroner's file. The community that had mobilized to find one missing hiker now had to fold 3 more names into mourning. The search was suspended, not because the need to find John diminished, but because the cost of continuing demanded a recalculation none of them wanted to make. In the weeks and months that followed, investigators with clipboards and soft shoes did their work in the same rain that had once crusted the searchers' beards. They reconstructed the last flight paths, analyzed engine components and flight logs, and interviewed witnesses whose memories were already being eroded by shock. They wrote reports and recommended procedural updates and grounded conjecture in the language of aviation mechanics. The inquiry was technical and necessary, a ritual of order against the muddy chaos of the accident. It said, part of the story in the tone of institutional responsibility. There were failures and anomalies to be corrected, recommendations to prevent recurrence. Those sentences would be copied into the annals of the Park Service and the Aviation Authority and would be used to refine training and policy. They would not, could not, say what it felt like to stand on the slope where the rotor blades had dug the earth and see the small rifts in the moss as if nature had been wounded. There are 2 kinds of absences that wilderness makes: the absence that is answered and the absence that is compounded. When a person vanishes without a body, their family carries both the whole of the missing body and the whole of what might have been done differently. Whether the artifacts of a life, a pair of boots, a jacket, a camera tucked in a pocket, are ever found is a technical matter that does not account for the shape of grief. In John Devine's case, a man had gone into the forest and did not return. By the time legal and official closure made its motion, a separate closure had appeared in the practical sense. The search had been called, in effect, for the safety of others. That meant there was no triumphant retrieval, no reunion scene of embrace and relief. There was instead the grinding machinery of accident reports and the slow, cold reasoning of insurance forms. The families of those who died in the crash had to answer different questions than the family of the missing man. Their grief was not a story in search terms, it was a story in litany and in legalities. Insurance claims, death certificates, and the inquest's language clipped out personal narratives and replaced them with standardized phrases. The Park Service issued statements, and reporters quoted fax times, models, procedural findings, because facts are the only narrative acceptable in a public forum where painful things must be handled with calm. The press gave concise summaries, and sometimes the clarity of those summaries felt like salt poured over an old wound. People read them at breakfast tables as though such news were part of the morning. The families learned how to live with a public say-so that could not be made private again. The rumor mills of small rescue towns are fast. Where the paperwork stops, rumor flows, and it is in rumor that the darker imagination can move. Some people said the weather had been worse than official reports admitted. The clouds had come from the west like blankets. Others suggested an instrument failure, a pilot miscalculation. There were those who whispered about mechanical neglect, and those who blamed the mountain itself, as if the topography had a will and used its contours like a hand to topple man-made things. None of it mattered against the fact of death. Conjectures became useless therapies, a way to imagine control in a world that had demonstrated so plainly that control was a brittle thing. The rescue operations end created practical consequences in the wild. Resources were redirected, searchers were offered counseling and time with their families, and protocols were amended to protect both rescuers and rescued in the future. In quiet meeting rooms, men and women who had been on the ridge that day talked and recorded and made tapes and lists, not because they wanted to keep the pain recurring, but because they had a responsibility to ensure that the same noise would not be associated with the same outcome. Those meetings took the edge off nothing of human suffering, but they did make an institutional promise. Institutions must, in their own language, speak promises when people cannot. There were political undertones too, because when disaster happens, the public wants to know whether it was preventable. Press conferences were held with the flat, rehearsed pacing of officialdom. Questions were asked about funding and training and staffing. Answers were given in the idiomatic language of public agencies. There is an ugly arithmetic in such conversations. What is the acceptable risk of searching for one life versus the risk of losing more? It is a calculus that must be made, which makes the sorrow of the decision more complicated. The decision to suspend the search after rescuers die is not one a community takes lightly. It is a wedge between the desire to act and the obligation to protect those who act. In small towns near the forests, where hunting and logging and weather share an intimate history with life and death, the event was folded into a larger narrative of relationship with land. People who had for years read the mountains as others read weather reports, interpreting signs and tendencies, knowing that the woods had their moods, responded with a particular weariness. They knew that mountains and forests take lives. They also knew that sometimes, and regretfully, they take their toll through the oddest conduits, not merely rockfalls and hypothermia, but through the instruments of rescue itself. That intimacy of knowledge creates a certain bluntness. There is a way to be sorrowful and clear-eyed at once when you live with such geography. Friends of John Devine said he had been a man of small and stubborn pleasures, someone who liked the solidity of a hike and the concentration of being alone with a pack on his back. He was not a reckless man, they said. He took his food and his jacket and he packed sensibly. That made the outcome seem cruelly disproportionate. There are 100 ways a human can disappear: a slit, a storm that comes faster than expected, an animal encounter, a misstep into a hidden ravine. None of those small mechanisms tells the whole story. They offer fragments that the mind uses to try to assemble an answer, but assembly is not invention. It is the greedy hunger of survival to make coherence where the world has shown none. The families of the rescuers, those who perished, also carried the forest in an altered way. Their loved ones had gone aloft to hunt for another human and had not made it down. There is a particularly sharp irony in that. The mountain had reclaimed both the hunted and the hunter at different times. Families who had once been comforted by a rescue team's presence now carried silence. There were public vigils and private dinners, and in the minutes between official statements, funerals took place with all the small, rendered grief of human life. People who attend funerals know their rhythms intimately: the folding of hands, the specific wear of clothing, the tiny practicalities that make grief concrete. Years after the crash and the suspension of the search, John Devine's disappearance lingered like a bruise beneath the skin of communal memory. Occasionally, hikers would whisper his name in the trailhead lot as they adjusted backpacks, as if speaking his name out loud might have an effect. New rangers read the old incident reports as part of their training because stories that are tragic are also, for a time, lessons. The files sat in binders with dates and cross-references, and the memory of 3 dead rescuers and 1 missing hiker added a weight to the Park Service's collective memory that colored subsequent decisions in subtle, persistent ways. It is easy to narrate the outward facts because they are the only parts that render themselves to archival certainty: the dates, the aircraft model, the suspension of the search. Those items are the mortar in an architectural description of an event. They do not, however, account for what grief feels like when it is shared by a community that defines itself by its relationship to wild places. The emotional geography is complex: pride in the institution that tries to save, resentment for the mountain that takes, awe for the weather that doesn't ask permission, and an abiding private fear for those who still go into those places. The event becomes a cautionary tale and a piece of local lore, both. Sometimes, in the distance of a day, the forest offers a small, disorienting mercy, a kind of ordinary beauty that undercuts dramatic grief with the triviality of life's continuance. Mossy trunks gleam, streams sing their wet songs, Ravens annotate the air with a slow, brazen rhythm. Those scenes are almost brutal in their insistence that life continues when humans decide it must. The natural world, in its steadfast duration, does not change its course to accommodate sorrow. That is not cruelty as much as it is indifference, and perhaps indifference is the most difficult character for humans to wrestle with emotionally. There are mothers who still place lit candles at trailheads, hands folded over the flame, and there are pilots who do not fly into the kind of conditions that change ordinary chore into a tragedy. The rules adjusted, the policies tightened, the arrangements for families were handled with more caution. Those practical changes are of a sort that institutional memory prefers. They accept the lesson and attempt to prevent a repeat. But they do not bring back the turning of a foot, or the precise cadence of a laugh, or the heat of a warm jacket on a February morning. No policy can stitch that back into being. When a forest keeps someone, it keeps also a plethora of questions. People are left to inhabit hypothetical narratives, to fold into the event their own fears and wishes. There is a human hunger to tell a neat story, to find a villain, to find a clear accident, to place blame as if blame could assemble the scattered atoms of a life back into human shape. The truth is often meaner and smaller, harder to tell without sounding like a person who prefers tidy truths. The mountain was there, the weather was there, the decisions had been made. In the end, what remained were records and small human acts, a candle left by a bench, a name repeated into the air, the wearing of a jacket in his memory on rainy days. Some nights, the people who had been closest to the events sat in the dim of their living rooms and read back through the old dispatches as if they were sacred texts. They listened for a line that would make sense, that would finally offer a narrative that was satisfying. They did not find it. They did not find it. What they found instead was the terrible simplicity that the world had its own laws, not made for them. That simplicity is harder to dramatize because it lacks villainy. It is instead a quiet thesis. Sometimes the wild does not give back what you have offered it. The mountain kept what the mountain kept. There is an unassailable fact in that sentence. It is not poetic. It is the manner in which nature asserts itself. People tell stories afterward to keep the shape of the missing person from dissolving under weather and time. That is why we tell John Devine's story, not because the archives require it, but because the heart does. We tell it to name it, and in naming something, we do not make it smaller, we simply make it humanly bearable. In the weeks before he disappeared, Gilbert Mark Gilman moved through the world with the deliberate stillness of a man who had learned long ago not to waste motion. He was the sort of presence that settled quietly into a room-measured voice, square shoulders, a faint air of distance that came from years spent in uniform, and years after that, spent decoding the small bureaucracies that shape a civilian life. At 47, he had lived enough for two men, airborne infantry, intelligence work, overseas assignments that he did not talk about except in polite half-phrases. Those who knew him well understood that his quiet was not retreat, but discipline. He had built his life around controlled environments, government offices, his tidy apartment, the morning walks he took to keep his legs lithe and his mind alert, which is why, on June 24, 2006, the simplicity of his plan seemed almost uncharacteristic. He told a friend he was heading up to Staircase near Lake Cushman for a short walk, not a long hike, not a daring backcountry traverse, just a walk, something to stretch the lungs and loosen the knots that had gathered in his back from a week spent hunched over project files. He drove his gold Mercury to the trailhead just before midday, locked the doors, and stepped into the Olympic forest as though stepping into a familiar room. No one would see him again. In the days that followed, the forest held its silence with the patience of ancient things. The spruce and hemlock that border the Staircase entrance are older than any living resident of the surrounding towns, older than the state's recorded history. Their crowns knit together into a green ceiling through which light falls in narrow, reluctant shafts, making the forest floor appear half-lit even at noon. On the day Gil walked in, the weather had been mild blue sky, faint behind a translucent film of cloud. The parking lot was not crowded. A few day hikers, a pair of teenagers carrying fishing gear, a couple whose dog barked at everything. There was nothing remarkable in the scene, nothing portentous in the hush of the air or the direction of the wind. It was the kind of day that the unthinking call safe, but the forest does not measure safety in the same increments as people do. To the forest, safety is irrelevant. There is only presence or absence, body or no body, the steady exhalation of wind through branches. When Gil did not return that evening, his absence did not ring any alarms at first. He lived alone. He kept odd, sometimes long, hours. It was entirely plausible that he had driven elsewhere after his walk, for coffee or a late meal. It was only the following morning, when he failed to show for a scheduled appointment, that the first small stone of concern dropped into the pond of someone's mind. It went unanswered, and the elegant logic of a man who always replied promptly suddenly collapsed into a series of voicemails. By midday, those voicemails sharpened into something like worry. The sheriff's office found his car at the trailhead that afternoon, locked, pristine, nothing disturbed. Inside were the sorts of things a man carries when he expects to return: wallet, camera, half-finished notes from a work project tucked under a pen. It did not look like the car of someone intending to be gone. It looked like a moment paused. Search teams were dispatched that evening. They combed the first miles of trail, the footbridges over the Skokomish River, the moss-shot side paths where hikers sometimes wander down to look for salmon in the shallow light. They called his name until the forest swallowed the syllables. They found no footprints bearing his distinct stride, no broken branches, no scraps of clothing, no clue to the direction he had taken after stepping past the sign that said "Staircase, entering Olympic National Park." The sign seemed suddenly prophetic, though no one said so aloud. In the first 72 hours, the search followed the optimism that protocol demands. The terrain was rugged, but he was fit. The weather was not bad. There were no reports of dangerous animals in the area, no signs of human predators. A misstep could cause injury, but an injured man leaves a trail: blood, disturbed moss, snapped ferns. Nothing appeared. Nothing even teased the boundary between chance and probability. It was as though the forest had swallowed not only the man, but the track of his passing. On the fourth day, reporters began calling. Missing hiker, experienced, former military, good health, no trace. The narrative wrote itself with the brutal efficiency local news prefers. The sheriff's spokesman gave the facts and none of the speculation. Missing adult male. Last seen at staircase. Search underway, no further comment, but speculation sprouted in the spaces between sentences. The neighbors in his apartment building whispered their versions. Some said maybe he'd gone off to start a new life, but that theory died quickly. He had left behind everything, even the small ID card he always carried clipped inside his wallet. Others suggested a heart attack off trail, but again, the forest had not produced a body. Bodies in that region do surface, eventually. They do not vanish into fiction. As the days passed, the search widened until it spanned ridges and drainages miles beyond where he had planned to walk. Helicopters traced loops in the sky. Volunteers scoured brush that cut their arms bloody. Dogs sniffed out the hollows beneath logs where the living and dead sometimes lie. Nothing. The forest was not withholding clues. It was not playing a game. It simply possessed nothing human for them to find. Eventually, as protocol dictates, the search scaled back, not ended, but withdrawn in the practical sense that fewer boots struck the ground, fewer radio calls crackled through static, fewer hopes burned themselves out each morning. Officially, the case remained open. Unofficially, the wilderness had made its decision. Months passed, and then years, and into the vacuum of evidence poured theories. People spoke his name in the same tone one uses for unsolved math problems. There was a rumor that maybe he had been seen leaving the trail, though no eyewitness ever confirmed it. There was another rumor that a serial killer who later confessed to murders across several states had spent time in Washington around the same period. Some said the disappearance bore that individual's signature: remote area, no evidence, a man who traveled alone. But theories are hungry things, and hunger is not truth. No credible link was ever found. There was no evidence of a crime, no evidence of an accident, no evidence of anything at all. The most disturbing disappearances are not the ones that end in violence. They are the ones that end in vacancy. The places where a man once stood become geological problems. Bureaucratic riddles, a case file with no last page. The forest remembers nothing. The family remembers everything. Gil's mother called the sheriff's office every week for months, then once a month. Then, as time eroded the possibility of hope, she called only on anniversaries. The detectives were kind as the state allows its agents to be. They offered updates in the negative: no new leads, no new sightings, no results from the new canine unit. They said his file remained active. They did not say what everyone else said when the phone clicked off, that a file may be active, but a man might not be. Some evenings, hikers returning from staircase would mention a strange sensation near the bridge. Nothing supernatural, just a prickling awareness, as though someone watched them through the thick underbrush. Others mentioned the eerie quiet in the gulch downstream, a quiet deeper than usual, the kind that seems to have weight. People often assign feelings to places without warrant, but in the years after Gil's disappearance, the forest seemed to collect those feelings like dew. No one could say why, only that something lingered. His car remained in the impound yard for more than a year. No one wanted to claim it. Eventually, the state transferred it to a storage lot, where a volunteer lifted the tarp once during a rainstorm and found the interior exactly as it had been left. Papers orderly, dust settled gently along the dash. It looked like a photograph of the moment before a life vanishes. 5 years after he disappeared, a ranger hiking off duty along an unmarked spur trail found a scrap of weather-beaten fabric snagged on a rotting stump. It was gray, the sort of gray that once had color but had surrendered it. He collected it, bagged it, turned it in. Testing revealed nothing, not blood, not DNA, not even a recognizable weave. It might have been his, or it might have been a fragment from an old backpack abandoned by someone decades earlier. It answered nothing. People forget that silence is evidence too. Silence accumulates. Silence forms a shape. His friends kept his memory alive in the small ways people do. Stories told at gatherings, a toast every year on his birthday, a photograph on a mantle. But even stories slowly distort. A detail sharpens. Another blurs. Someone remembers he wore a green jacket that day. Someone else swears it was blue. Someone recalls he said he was only going to walk 30 minutes. Someone else says an hour. The final hours of a missing man become a communal hallucination where everyone sees a different version of the same ghost. On the 10th anniversary of his disappearance, a small group held a vigil near the staircase entrance. Candles flickered on the wooden sign as dusk bled into the sky. Someone read a poem about mountains keeping secrets. Someone else played a recording of rainfall. They stood in silence, but the forest said nothing back. In the years that followed, the staircase trail changed as trails dew storms knocked down trees, winter crushed the footbridges under heavy snow, floodwaters rerouted sections of the river. New hikers came, old hikers left. Sometimes a park volunteer walking those corridors would stop and listen, as though memory itself were a sound carried on the understory breeze. But no sound ever came. Gil's disappearance became one of those stories that lives in the margins of park maps and internet forums. A ghost story with no ghost, only absence. Outsiders speculated wildly. Locals shrugged quietly. Those who had searched him remembered him in the language of their trade: hiker, male, adult, last known point, last known direction. They did not mention the strangeness of the empty car, or the strangeness of the locked doors, or the strangeness of a trail that held no evidence a man had passed. Some say a disappearance is only mysterious because we expect answers. If one accepts that wilderness is greater than human comprehension, then a man's vanishing becomes no more mystical than a stone dropping into a lake. The ripples fade, the water flattens, the world continues. But that is an unsatisfying explanation for loved ones who live with the shape of the missing carved into their days. The world continues for the world. It does not continue for the waiting. No remains have ever been found. No gear, no bone fragment, no tattered cloth that can be proven his. The forest has grown thicker in the intervening years, covering over the pathways that might once have held his footprints. The search logs have been archived. The case file sits in a municipal drawer with a number on the spine that reveals nothing of its ache. What happened to him cannot be told because the forest did not leave a witness. There is only the brute fact of his entry and the blank that followed. The living must choose which story to tell. The gentle one where he slipped and died quietly in a bed of fern, or the darker one where another human shadowed him between the trees. Or perhaps the strange one where he walked into the woods and never looked back, wishing to vanish into the world's oldest silence. But none of these stories fit perfectly. They are clothes borrowed from strangers. The truth, whatever shape it takes, remains in the place where the trail bends into the shadows, somewhere between the river's low roar and the breath of the trees. A place where, on a bright June afternoon, a man walked forward and the world folded behind him like a door, and did not open again. I have carried the weight of December 1st, 1990, longer than I have carried any other date in my career. This journal was never meant for confession. It began as a field notebook, a place to store measurements, times, specimen IDs, all the neat bureaucratic bones beneath an investigation. But the Kalalock case lodged itself under my skin, and years later I still open these pages at night, unable to sleep, and write down the pieces of memory that continue to rot as slowly and stubbornly as a body buried in damp coastal earth. The call came while I was finishing reports in the Fork substation, the sky outside bruised with coastal weather, the kind that never fully becomes rain but never quite stops threatening. A traveler walking the bluff trail north of Kalalock Lodge had found what he thought was a sleeping camper, a mummy bag, olive green, army issue, zipped up to the chin. He said he'd called out twice. No answer. He stepped close enough to see the bag was wet at one end. An odd detail. He hadn't unzipped it. Something in the stillness of the form, he said, told him not to touch it. I arrived at the bluff with a ranger named Kelly, a man who always seemed older than he was. Gray at the temples at 35, voice flat as winter surf. The cold had a bite, and the wind cut upward from the beach, carrying the smell of kelp and salt-rotted driftwood. I remember thinking the scene was strangely quiet for that stretch of coast. Even the crows weren't calling. The mummy bag lay exactly where the caller described, 8 feet from the edge, on a patch of grass matted low by frost. Someone had set it down carefully. That was the first thing that struck me. It wasn't tossed, wasn't dragged. No scuff marks, no trail of disturbed soil, just placed. When I knelt beside it, a corner of the canvas was torn. The tier had crusts of dried mud around it. Something had seeped out. The zipper was drawn all the way to the top, tucked beneath the flap. A neat job. I told Kelly to stand back and log the time. Then I unzipped it halfway. Even now, decades later, I can see the color before my mind sees anything else. The skin was mottled, waxen, as if smeared with old candle grease. The face was turned sideways, pressed into the fabric, and the eye, only one visible, was half open, dried to a dull film. Cold had stiffened the limbs. The skull had a depression along the temple, an injury with edges like fractured shale. I re-zipped the bag and stood up. "This is a homicide," I said. The wind answered for him. Back at the station, I logged the initial findings with the mechanical calm that training demands. Female, adult, estimated in her 20s. Apparent head trauma, bag likely placed post-mortem. The words looked inadequate in the report, as if the English language lacked enough syllables to contain the brutality of what I had seen. The coroner's van arrived by dusk, lights muted against the fog. Her identity came quickly. Missing woman from Hoquiam, reported 5 days earlier. R. I write only her initials, though I remember her name every day. She had left her boyfriend's house after an argument, according to the report. She hadn't returned. Her sister filed the missing person notice. She'd described RR as someone who would never hitchhike, never camp alone, never vanish voluntarily. I visited the sister 2 days later. She answered the door with a hollow-eyed stillness that told me she'd already guessed the truth. She didn't ask whether her sister had suffered. The families never asked directly. They circled a question like an animal that knows the trap is baited. I didn't soothe her with professional euphemisms. I told her we believed the assault had happened elsewhere and the body moved. She nodded once and closed her eyes as if bracing for a wave only she could see coming. The boyfriend, let me call him H, became the center of our inquiry almost immediately. He lived in a small rental that smelled of cigarettes and fermented clothes. The first time I interviewed him, he kept his eyes fixed on the television behind me, where a nature program showed bears tearing salmon along a riverbank. I watched his pupils follow the bear's jaws as if they offered him an exit from the conversation. She left on her own, he said. That's all. She gets dramatic. Dramatic, I repeated, letting the word hang heavy. He shrugged. She walks off sometimes. But her sister had denied this. So had her coworkers. I looked around his living room. There were boots by the door, caked with mud. A military surplus sleeping bag slumped in the corner, brown, not green. Beer cans on the table, arranged in a half circle like some primitive shrine, and on the armchair, a jacket with a dark stain along the cuff. You go up to Kalaloke? I asked. What? No. Too quick. Been there recently? I said no. I asked him to walk me through the night RRR left. He gave a version with pieces missing. He couldn't decide whether she had stormed out at 7 or 8. Couldn't remember if he followed her to the street. Couldn't say why he hadn't called anyone in the days after. She took nothing with her, he said, as though this were normal. By the time we obtained the warrant, he was already avoiding us. He'd skipped work. His neighbors said he was laying low. Inside his home, we found the jacket with the stained blood, but not enough to make a case of it, and tire tracks in the mud behind the house that matched impressions near an unmarked turnout a mile north of the bluff. But matching tracks isn't proof, and proof is the only currency a courtroom accepts. The autopsy confirmed what I already suspected: massive blunt force trauma to the head, likely inflicted by an object with a narrow edge. Sexual assault likely occurred, though the condition of the body made certainty impossible. The bag showed signs of being carried creases along one side where weight had folded the canvas. The coroner estimated the time of death within a day of her disappearance. I spent long nights reconstructing the possibilities. She leaves the house after the argument. He follows her, or forces her back inside, or convinces her to talk in his truck. Something violent happens there. Hot, sudden, unplanned. She dies. He panics, loads her into the bag, drives north in the dark, parks in the turnout, hauls her through the trees to the bluff, drops her where she'll be found. But why there? Why such a public place? Some perpetrators hide their dead, some display them. Some are too afraid to know the difference. The investigation dragged through winter. H maintained his innocence with the slack patience of a man who believes patience itself can erase suspicion. The deputies called me the quiet one because I didn't speak during our long drives along 101, but the truth was simpler. The silence soothed me. The forest at night has a strange honesty. It does not pretend to care. I returned to the bluff often, sometimes officially, to check new erosion, more often alone. The ocean below thundered against the rocks with repetitive fury. The bluff face changed subtly month by month, new cracks, sloughed debris, the slow carving of time. I watched winter storms drag entire logs onto the beach, leaving them like ribs of drowned beasts. I always stopped in the same place where the bag had lain. The grass never grew back evenly. There was a patch the size of my boot where nothing green ever returned. Soil remembers blood in ways plants cannot mask. I wrote my observations in this journal as if words pinned the truth down, but words do not pin anything. They simply sit beside the silence, trying to negotiate with it. People think investigators grow numb. I know better. We grow quiet. There is a difference. Numbness would have been mercy. Quietness was survival. The case never reached indictment. Circumstantial. That word became a kind of poison. No witness, no confession, no unshakable physical link. The prosecutor told me H would walk if we pushed it. Homicide investigations are often battles fought against time, but this one was fought against the void, the places where evidence should be and never is. Officially, the case remains unsolved. Unofficially, everyone carries their own verdict. I have mine. Years passed. I transferred out of fieldwork. New cases came, some easier, some far worse, but none clung to me the way Kalaloch did. Sometimes I wake at 4 a.m. and feel the cold of that cliff again. The wind pushing hard enough to sting my eyes, the ocean below chanting its mindless hunger. One winter, long after the trails reroute, I went back to the bluff for the last time. No badge, no call-out, no notebook, just myself. Rain like thin needles, the ground soft underfoot, the ocean breaking itself apart on the rocks. I stood in the exact place the mummy bag had lain, now just a shallow downturn in the soil, and listened. Storms rolled miles offshore. Each flash of lightning lit the cliff in pale film. I waited for something, some memory, some ghost, some understanding, but nothing came. Only the steady hiss of rain on grass. Only the smell of salt and cold iron. Back home, I opened this journal and read the first entries again. They feel clinical now, stripped of their sting. But when I reached the page written the night after the autopsy, I paused. The ink had bled slightly from exposure years ago. The handwriting trembled. I had written a single line. She deserved witnesses, not to her death, to her life, to the hours before the world narrowed around her, to the person she had been before she became a case file, a report, a cautionary anecdote. Locals pass in low voices. Every year I light a candle on December 1st. I do not say her name aloud. I do not pray. I simply let the candle burn down until its flame gutters. It is a small ritual for a woman. The world forgot almost as soon as it learned she was missing. Sometimes I imagine a different ending. Someone hears her shout. Someone sees a struggle. Someone calls in time. But imagination is mercy, and mercy has no place in an investigator's ledger. We work with facts, even when they are insufficient. Even when they leave you staring out at a violent ocean, wondering how many secrets the waves have carried away. I have kept this journal not because I wish to remember, but because forgetting feels like a second crime. And on nights when the wind rises and the rain rattles the eaves, I see again the shape of that olive green bag on the frost-pressed grass, quiet as a coffin, waiting at the edge of the world for someone to open it and find the truth no forest had ever meant to reveal. I was that someone, and I never stopped carrying what I found. I don't talk about the Ozette search anymore, not to my family, not to the newer rangers who ask about the strange ones, not to the journalists who still send emails every August pretending they want clarity instead of spectacle. But there are nights when sleep won't hold me, when the wind comes up just right off the Pacific and the house creaks like wet cedar and the memory presses its knuckles against the inside of my skull until I open the old notebook and write it down again, exactly as I remember it. I was there when Brian Johnston disappeared. I was there when the forest swallowed him. And I was there long after the others gave up. It started like they all start. An overdue hiker report, a truck abandoned at the Ozette ranger station, a name spoken with growing urgency. He'd left on the 22nd of August, a 71-year-old man moving slow but steady, not inexperienced, not foolish. The Ozette Loop is a place people bring their families, boardwalks over bogs, miles of flat beach, title charts posted at the trailhead for anyone who bothers to read them. But the older rangers used to warn us, that coastline is honest only to itself. The ocean doesn't care about your confidence. The forest doesn't care about your age. By the time we assembled the first search team, the truck had been sitting there for 2 nights. The rain had washed away whatever prints he'd left going out. The boardwalk held no clues, just moisture and algae and the faint echo of footsteps that could have belonged to anyone. We split into 2 teams and took opposite ends of the loop, pushing through the cool morning fog until the forest spat us out onto the beach. The ocean was loud that day, not angry but insistent. It's strange what details stick with you. We found nothing the first day, nothing the second, nothing the third. And then, on the 4th day, a volunteer from town found a section of disturbed sand far north of the usual trail crossing drag marks maybe, or maybe just beach logs rolling with the tides. Hard to say. Every clue along that coastline dissolves under the next gust of wind. But I remember the moment because of the quiet. The ocean hushed for a breath, as if listening. It was the first time I felt watched. On the 5th day, I was assigned alone to the northern section near Cedar Creek. They don't do that anymore, sending one ranger alone into a search zone, but back then the rules were different. Or maybe we were just more reckless. The fog had rolled in thick as sheep's wool, and I could barely see 20 feet ahead. The logs were slick, the air smelled of iodine and wet stone, and the sand sucked at my boots like it wanted to take me too. That was when I saw the first sign. Not his body, not his clothes, something worse, a footprint, bare, human, pressed into the wet sand in a direction that made no sense, angled up toward the headland, as if someone had climbed the wall of stone and root with nothing on their feet. Brian had boots, good ones. Nobody walks that coastline barefoot. Nobody could. I followed the prints for a while. They climbed the rocks, impossible as that sounds. But the higher I went, the stranger the air felt, dense, charged, carrying the faintest vibration through the stone, like the hum of something enormous just outside perception. I stopped at the base of the cliff. The prints ended there, not faded, not washed out, ended, as if someone had stepped into the rock and disappeared. I told the incident commander what I found. He frowned, wrote something in his log, and said maybe the tide had washed out the rest. I didn't push it. Rangers don't get to sound insane, not in the report. But I didn't sleep that night. On the 7th day, the dogs came in. They worked the trailheads, the forest, the boardwalk, the beaches. They found nothing. They acted wrong, jumping at shadows, pawing at the sand, whining at the forest as if something inside it frightened them. Dogs don't care about professionalism. They only care about what their senses tell them. 2 of them refused to go down the trail toward the beach. They planted their feet and barked into the ferns until their handlers pulled them away. On the 8th day, the tide trapped 3 volunteers between headlands, and we had to send a boat to get them. They were shaking when we pulled them in. One of them, a man I'd known for years, steady as bedrock, grabbed my wrist and whispered, "He's not alone out there." I asked what he meant. He just shook his head. Later, he quit the volunteer corps without explanation. The fog thickened every day. It shouldn't do that in late August, not like this. It pressed low over the trees, hugging the coastline with a weight that felt intentional. The older Quillup men who heard about the search shook their heads in that way. Elders do when the young walk into a story older than they realize. I didn't understand then. I do now. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We found the backpack on the 10th day. It was half buried in sand, tucked between 2 logs as if placed there deliberately. Sand had filled the outer pockets. The fabric was dry on one side, soaked on the other. The tags matched the description the family gave us. Inside were his snacks, all uneaten, his map, his extra socks, his reading glasses in their case. Nothing looked torn or panicked. But the strangest thing was the boardwalk dirt, tiny flecks of plant matter from a forested section nowhere near where the pack was found. The ocean did not carry that pack. Something else did. We searched the area around it for 2 days. We found no footprints. Not even mine lasted long on that stretch. Wind erased them instantly. But the dogs reacted violently there. One whimpered and rolled onto her back. The other growled at nothing, her hackles rising as she stared at a patch of empty air between 2 logs. I started to dream about him at night. Brian, standing on the sand, clothes soaked through, head tilted slightly as though listening to something far inside the forest. In the dream, he wasn't frightened. He was answering. On the 12th day, we found the logs arranged. I hesitate even as I write this, though the memory is as sharp as the morning frost. Along the upper beach, just below the forest line, something had laid drift logs in a pattern. 3 long logs in a row. A 4th crossing them. A 5th angled toward the cliffside. Not a natural scatter. Not even the ocean is that precise. One of the volunteers murmured that it looked like an arrow. Another said it looked like a boundary. I thought it looked like a warning. We documented it. Then a wave came higher than expected and erased half the pattern. The logs rolled like startled animals. When the water withdrew, the shape was gone. On the 14th day, the search scaled back. The commander gathered us around the tailgate of his truck. His voice was gravelly from too many nights awake. "We'll continue limited operations," he said, "but chances of survival at this point are..." He didn't finish the sentence. We nodded. We are trained to nod, but I felt my insides go cold, not because he said the words, because deep down I knew. The search hadn't failed. We had simply been looking in the wrong direction. That night I walked the trail alone. I shouldn't have. I know that now. The fog had thinned to ribbons, drifting between the trees like pale hands. The forest smelled wrong, fermented, sweet in a way that turned my stomach. My flashlight hit the boardwalk, glistening with dew, and for a moment the whole world felt tilted, as if the trees leaned in above me. I made it to the junction where the trail breaks toward the beach. I don't know why I stopped there. Something in the air felt electric, heavy, pushing against my ribs. And then I heard it, not a voice, not an animal, something between the two. A low, rhythmic sound, like breath being drawn through a throat too large to belong to a human. It echoed through the trees, bounced off the logs, wove itself into the ocean waves until I could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. I froze. My breath steamed in the cold. The forest fell utterly still. Even the ocean paused, as if waiting. Then a whisper, not through the air, but through the ground. A vibration, a pulse. The same pulse I had felt at the cliffside where the footprints ended. I stood there until my flashlight flickered. Then I turned and walked back, not ran. I don't know how I didn't run. Something inside me knew that running would be a mistake I would not return from. After that night, I told the commander I couldn't search solo anymore. He didn't ask why. Maybe he saw something in my face. The official search ended soon after, unresolved, no further leads. No confirmed sightings, no recovered remains. Families always want answers. I wanted answers too. But the forest did not offer any. It simply closed around the silence and kept it. 2 years later, a storm tore up part of the trail and exposed a section of old boardwalk buried beneath new growth. A hiker found a boot there, not his size, not his style. Nothing that helped. 3 years later, a fisherman found a bone near the mouth of a creek 10 miles north. Deer bone. Again, nothing. But every time someone goes missing on that coastline, and they do, more often than tourists realize, I think of the logs arranged in patterns, the barefoot prints climbing stone, the dogs refusing to go near the forest edge, and I think of the sound, that deep, hungry breathing beneath the earth. Sometimes I dream Brian is still out there. Not alive. Not dead either, standing where the forest and ocean meet, listening to something older than both. In the dreams, he turns toward me. His eyes are hollowed by the wind. His hair is crusted with salt. He lifts a hand, not waving, pointing toward the trees, toward the thing that took him, the thing that waits in the fog. I wake up drenched in sweat every time. The case file sits in a drawer somewhere, growing yellow at the edges. His truck was reclaimed by the family. His name is spoken every now and then when new rangers are trained on coastal safety, but not the real story, not the part that still walks the beach at night. People believe a man disappears because he gets lost, or injured, or makes one fatal misstep. They don't want to believe the forest itself can hunger. They don't want to believe something ancient moves alongside the tide. But I was there. I saw the signs. I heard the breathing, and I have not gone back to that coastline alone since. Some nights when the wind is right, I swear I hear it outside the house. That slow, deliberate, patient inhale. Like it remembers me. Like it is still waiting for the one ranger who walked too close to its edge. I close the curtains. I lock the doors. I write these memories down again and again, as if repetition could dilute them. But the truth is simple and terrible. The Ozette loop did not lose Brian Johnston. It took him, and it knows we were watching.